Now, in July this year, Becky Chaplin had just returned home from the pub when a 16-year-old boy broke into her flat and raped her. The perpetrator was sentenced to 5.5 years detention, and because he was a child at the time of the crime, he hasn't been publicly identified.
Well, now 21-year-old Becky has waived her right to anonymity as she believes her attacker deserves to be named and shamed. Becky joins us alongside media lawyer Jane Isaacs. Good morning to both of you. Becky, thank you so much for coming in. It's incredibly brave to do something like this, to waive your right to anonymity. Why do you feel so strongly in this case that you needed to do that?
I feel like it makes more of an effect if, my name's out.
When you found out that the perpetrator was going to remain anonymous, how did you feel?
I think it made the whole experience a bit worse because obviously you've got to deal with everything like that, and then you see that he's not really getting as much justice as he needs.
So for you, obviously it was a horrific crime, you know, and there's nothing that can change that, whatever age the perpetrator was. But the fact that he has some anonymity and therefore some protection from reaction to that crime, how does that affect you?
I'm not really sure. It's a word gets around really easily, especially when you're from a small place, so everyone knows who I was, but only certain people knew who he was. So
you feel like you're, in a sense,
yeah,
having the punishment of being known, but he has got protection despite being guilty.
Jane, it's a truly horrific situation for Becky to have to live through. The fact that she's waived her right to anonymity, you'll understand just how brave that is of her in this sort of situation. And lots of people this morning will be saying, like Becky does, how on earth this 16-year-old isn't being named as well in the same circumstance. What is the law?
Well, essentially, any young people, and people between the ages of 14 and 18 are considered young people under the law, when they appear in the Crown Court charged with a serious offence, it's at the discretion of the court whether or not they remain anonymous. And the court is always going to have these competing interests that a judge takes into account. The interest in the public, that includes victims, and it includes all of us, to know what's going on in court, who's done what they're accused of and what they've been convicted of. But also it runs right through the law dealing with young people in court that the welfare of those young people have to be taken into account. So any judge deciding whether or not to allow identification of a juvenile defendant is absolutely bound to take into account that person's welfare. And that seems really difficult for people to get their head round when people have done horrendous crimes. But it is a sort of thread running through the law as it applies to young people.
I suppose, Becky, what the argument might be is that because he's young, he has a chance to change, and part of our justice system is punishment, and the other is hoping for some kind of rehabilitation so that that person can learn their lesson and go back out into society and lead a good, for want of a better word, life. I mean, do you understand that?
I understand that. I just think it's a little bit pointless. I can understand rehabilitation for petty crimes and stuff because that is justifiable. You may have been in a bad place or whatever, but raping someone, how can you rehabilitate from that? Is that...
Would the argument be, Jane, that if they didn't have that anonymity, they would never be able to move on from the crime in a positive way?
Yeah.
Would that be one of the arguments?
Well, there's a couple of things. The anonymity only lasts until someone's 18. So in some respect, all bets are off at that point. And it is, I suppose it's a case of where there's youth, there's still some hope. And the idea is that people go into detention, and if they are under 18, as you say, there's the hope that they will come out. It may be in some ways a sort of a vague hope, but the hope they'll come out and will not reoffend. And there's that window to get people to try and get them to follow a path that when they do come out, they're going to be hopefully rehabilitated.
Would they be on a register of some sort?
That anybody committing this kind of offence will be on a sex offenders register, which is a lifelong obligation. And also will be on licence, which means if they do anything when they come out for a given period, the probation service, and not just crimes, but not complying with the terms of their licence, they can be taken back into detention.
We've obviously seen the case of James Bolger and John Venables and Robert Thompson were named, and high-profile cases.
For years after they were released as adults, there was a lot of people on social media claiming to know who they were, what their new identities were, and thousands of pounds were spent trying to move those two people on because of the fear of other crimes being committed against them or their family as well. That's a consideration.
What's your fear that he's not being named?
That he's not going to get the justice that he needs. Like, when we were in court, the argument was that he was living with people that would hurt him if they found out who he was and what he'd done. And is that fair?
And how are you doing now, coping with dealing with what happened to you?
I'm better now, but like obviously it's just like one day at a time sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you're hoping, I'd imagine, by speaking out, you may help other
people,
victims in a similar position. Becky, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. It's incredibly brave, as we were saying, to do what you've done. And Jane, thanks for joining us as well.